So, Martin,
Yeah.
thanks for joining me to chat today.
Awesome.
So you are, just in case people don't know, you are the artistic director for Array Music.
I am indeed.
And when did you start?
A year and a half ago, July 2016.
Wow. And why did you start?
Why did I start?
That's kind of a silly question. What brought you to Array?
Well, really, the job coming open, because Array Music, turns over their artistic directors every 5 or 6 years. So Rick Sachs was ready to retire, and I'd been collaborating with Array since 1991 in various ways, running concerts in older spaces and writing pieces for the ensemble, and it seemed like a good time to get even more formally involved.
So we're basically halfway through the season. Is that right? Or
yeah, there's
a third?
Yeah, maybe more like a third, just because the winter, there's more events in the winter than there was in the fall. So
Right. So the next thing coming up is on January 26th, and it's 4 new works. So explain that to me.
It is what it says. There's going to be 4 new compositions. It builds on what was a very successful 4 New Works concert in Rick Sachs, my predecessor's last season. So we're commissioning 4 composers, and there is this side to it that I think I'll be developing yearly during my tenure, is that it's not just getting 4 new works, but it's by composers who, for various reasons, I think are worthy of greater attention than they've received so far. I mean, that can obviously mean a younger composer. In this case, someone like Rebecca Bruton is just at the cusp of her career, although it's funny how this stuff works. I mean, Rebecca's a friend of mine for a number of years, and I mean, we're definitely getting just under the wire of her not being known, because it seems like all of a sudden, not only Canada, but a lot of people have woken up to the fact that she's a really unique talent and are asking her for pieces. Marielle Groven, again, she's based in Montreal. I guess I should say Rebecca's based in Calgary right now. Marielle Groven is been at it a little longer than Rebecca, and obviously has, well, maybe it's not obvious, but she does have, people who are, fierce advocates of her work really all over the world. But again, in fairly, I'd say marginal pockets. But again, she's someone who I think has been doing wonderful work for a number of years, but has really deserved to have a light shined on her. Holger Schul is older than both of them, but is kind of I don't know if late bloomer is really right, but he just has such an idiosyncratic musical practice, both as a composer and as a player. And I mean, he reminds me of me. I was a gardener for 25 years as my main income, so that the music wouldn't have that kind of pressure, basically up until I took this. I mean, Holger's a master baker, and he's also, I think he's maybe the best pasta maker in Toronto. He makes all the pasta for Enoteca Sociale, which is an amazing trattoria on many levels, but the pasta's phenomenal, and that's Holger's doing. But at the same time, he's been doing this music.
Will he be serving some pasta at the event?
Maybe
you could encourage him to do that.
Yeah, really, that's what a true entrepreneurial artistic director would be working on, the Schul music pasta combo. But no, I think we're letting him off the hook that way.
Okay.
But he just has a really interesting in-between practice. I mean, all the composers do. I guess we'll be talking about that when we get to the next concert. But for number 4, the 4 new works, it's Stephen Parkinson, who's been a dear colleague of mine since the 80s. But he just made a decision very early on that music was going to be a real do-it-yourself thing with him. He's never really courted professional performance. He's put on a lot of music of his own. Again, developed an income that had nothing to do with music, so that the two wouldn't have to cross over. Mm-hmm. Really works with friends. That has meant that he's done array music pieces in the past. Eva Goyen has played and put out on CD a couple of his pieces, but he definitely doesn't chase things, but the music's absolutely like nobody's music in the world. So it seemed like a no-brainer for me the first time getting to do this, that I would, ask him to come up with a piece.
So, and again, I'm speaking from the point of view that some people watching may not know or be completely familiar with Array. So is that part of what Array does, is trying to foster, say, new musical talent, or those that don't have a showcase or vehicle for their music?
I think so, but it's not done as a charity. I think it's one of those things that actually is kind of more, for lack of a better word, organically linked even to my curatorial sensibility in general. Like, I think I say in a number of different places that I'm interested in experimental music that's speculative, that asks questions, encourages the listener to feel co-creative with situations. And that's true even when I'm, bringing in composers from an experimental music canon, as it were. But for me, it's not music that belongs to any genre. All of these composers sound very different from each other, but there is a singular quirkiness, I think, to all of their musics. Definitely that can have something to do with them maybe not being so recognized because they don't take part in kind of more canonic new music activities. Although, like I say, I think the whole milieu is changing so much. I feel like the kind of in-betweenness that a lot of these 4 composers, but other composers that I'm interested in embrace, is starting to gain more of an audience too. So maybe the margin where the margins are might change, and definitely I hope these people become better known, because the music's wonderful. It's magic.
I've heard rumors, anyway, or that it's been said that, quote unquote, new music is becoming more accepted in Canada in particular. Would you agree with that?
I think if that's a rumor, it's just because there really isn't a style anymore that really goes under the moniker of new music per se. Like, I think the biggest break is that people with strong academic backgrounds in composition who dealt with the kind of European canon in terms of standard repertoire are nonetheless getting further and further away from that. So you have music, again, we'll choose the name speculative, innovative, avant-garde, that's being done within milieus that don't have anything to do with classical music per se anymore. So I think the acceptance is that you can hear stuff that's involved in all kinds of sonic innovations at a booze can in Toronto now, or any kind of a club or in a house concert. So in that respect, it reaches into milieus that it didn't when it was kind of more firmly entrenched in the classical world. Mm-hmm. I think with Array, though, I think this is something well, definitely it's an interest in mine. I don't know if I'm bringing it to it, but it's almost gotten to the point though that where people are forgetting though that there's a powerful resource of classically trained musicians, people who can play anything, who are virtuosos, but not meaning that just that they can wiggle their fingers quickly, but I mean to play something unbelievably softly for a really long time is about as hard as things get. And that's I mean, right. for me, the beautiful thing about getting more involved with Array is that I have, these virtuoso musicians who I count as my friends too, who are willing to try music coming from these different musical spaces and still bring all of their abilities, like their astounding abilities to it. So I think maybe Array does is particularly strong in kind of bridging the DIY kind of noise improv scenes with the classical music scenes where those aesthetic milieus aren't so divided.
Yeah. And I find that as well in my travels, especially when I talk with younger musicians that are, potentially playing with the TSO or the COC. They'll do the standards, the Beethoven, the Mozart, but they're all still very intrigued and fascinated by contemporary classical or whatever, genre within a genre, that they can get their hands on.
Yeah, for sure. Although I think maybe what has changed though is for a long time, even people, doing new music where you might be dealing with incredible timbral colors or harmonic dissonances and, tuning schemes. You still had pieces though that still kind of had these dramatic arcs and sort of narrative forms that come very much out of the 18th and 19th century. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it's not to say, definitely the composers for new works, but other concerts, they're in conversation with that. But I think the big thing is that that kind of form that comes out of a European narrative conceit, composers who are wondering how to make a musical event happen aren't assuming that you have to do that when you're composing, that you can be dealing with no change, a certain kind of flatness, a certain kind of extreme detail within continuities, that there's a whole lot of other ways of thinking about time and material that come from other places than an upper class European history. And it makes sense. I mean, the world's pop music basically comes from the hell of the West African diaspora, and I mean, anyone who likes anything vaguely to do with, swing R&B or rock and roll is listening to, they're listening to a hybrid music, but they're listening to music infused with the West African imagination, which is very different than the European one. So we're brought up in that. And then I think there's now those speculative experimental musics that are, and this is nothing new. I mean, this, the so-called minimalists have been doing this, but it's becoming much broader how musicians are drawing on on these various cultural histories, I think.
So let's move on to rat drifting. So we've got a couple of rat drifting concerts in January and February. Before we do, tell me about what is rat drifting and where does the name hearken from?
Well, I mean, rat drifting as a title was initially a piano piece I wrote for Eva Goyen in the 90s. Then I started a series of music at the old Array space, which was not a performance space like this. It was more of a real rehearsal space, but it was big enough that you could have concerts. And it was basically, the series was for improvised music, post-rock music, but stuff that, experimental music that kind of, like we've been talking about, kind of falls between genres, but really do-it-yourself stuff. Stephen Parkinson was a huge feature in those early rat drifting concerts. And then Eric and Chanot and I started a CD label that lasted a few years to collect this music that was called Rat Drifting. It just seemed to be a title that kind of had legs in terms of people noticing it. So where the title came from, though, it was me riffing on a term called rat running. Okay. And rat running is where you use side streets to try and get to someplace faster. Like if you're in rush hour, you try and get off of the main drags that are congested and try and use, strange little byways to try and get to where you're going faster because it's congested. So it has to do with getting off the beaten track. I mean, there's all of those nice things in terms of thinking about speculative art making, that you're off the beaten track, you're kind of meandering in a way to try and go someplace. I mean, in that case, though, you're running because you're actually trying to get someplace, and that's what we're not at all interested in, though. So that's how it went from rat running to rat drifting. And I mean, just on its face, you think of drifting as drifting through spaces, but it also, for me, harkened back to the Situationist International's idea of the dérive, which is French for drift, but they had this whole idea of trying to get people to just drift through spaces where instead of trying to follow goals, follow tastes, follow predilections and presuppositions of what you want to be doing, you just allow yourself to drift through a city, and it becomes something where it almost leads you, as opposed to you thinking that you're using it. You want to go there and you're going to go this route. So definitely the music I celebrate has that quality to it where you're asked to enter it as a listener and drift through it.
So how are we drifting on January 27th?
Well, I guess with all the rat drifting concerts, they do follow the first series, and that it tends to be music sound work that sort of falls in between genres, venues, things like that. The one in January happens on the 27th, the day after the For New Works concert. And when I planned this For New Works, I didn't do this on purpose, but very early on when I chose the four, they all have really interesting and various and developed practices in different kinds of improvised music or performance. They just don't compose for other people. Holger's music and his improvisation are incredibly close. Stephen, it's something else again. He's an old rock and roll guitar player. He was in a kind of a glam blues band in Liverpool in the early 70s. Cool. Yeah, that's right. Open for Roxy Music. He plays guitar. Rebecca Bruton has this. She's a violinist, but also an amazing vocalist, and she does this music that's between a kind of some kind of psychedelic traditional folk music and noise. Mariel Groven mostly plays piano, but it's as kind of poised and protracted as her written music is. I mean, she's a really aggressive improviser, although it's also protracted. I mean, she'll deal with incredibly visceral textures, but just keep them going far beyond any kind of climactic, dramatic narrative thrust. So there's, anyway, the point is they all have these, very very singular improvised music practices, and I thought it would be good for them to be, since they're all being brought together for this concert of their compositions, that a rat drifting concert the next night would feature them combining in various aggregations to improvise some more new music.
Cool. And Rat Drifting 4 is on February 17th. and I'll read out the description that's on the website, because you're going to have to explain this to me. The composers collaborate in a night of somatic performance and mechanized kinetics with sound at the center.
Yes.
Explain.
Well, it's that terminology comes from their separate practices. The artists we're talking about, and I think it's artists more than I call them composers too. But it's Marla Halady and her partner Christophe Magone. Long before they got together, they were very established artists, more within the visual art field. I mean, Marla certainly, she's one of Canada's finest sculptors in the broadest sense of what a sculptor could be, and has been known that way for decades. Christophe, likewise, has been more involved with performance, often dealing with extreme physical events that kind of cause bodily dysfunctions and noises as he pushes them. I don't know how much to get into them. I mean, it's everything from amplifying, eating too many snails to sticking out his tongue for so long that it starts to hurt, and then there's the sounds that come with that. I mean, he's definitely the artist that most clearly is tied to the word somatic. It's one of his favorite words. I mean, the somatic has to do with anything to do with the body, especially when you think of the body as being separate from the mind. So it's not the body of thinking how to hit the nail right. Although, anyone who's seen someone who's good at hammering knows that there's a lot of not thought out, like there's just a lot of intuitive stuff going on there. But it is, it has to do with reflexes and reactions and just operations of the body that are on the margins of intentional physical action. Marla has had kinetics. That's like her sculptures move. There's mechanized things going on with them. That's been true of her work since the early 90s at least. From that, because of so many of the things, these strange, systematic, odd machines that are her sculptures, when she puts them in motion, I mean, the sounds are remarkable. And I think it was almost like this byproduct, that realizing that once you were dealing with kinetics, that you weren't just dealing with visual phenomena anymore, that you were dealing with sound and oral sensations that come from the cause of that. So she's steadily over the years been focusing on what sound the machines make. But since they've come together, they've done a lot of collaborative work where it's rich in its dance, and I don't know what they're going to be doing in February. That's going to be an exciting surprise for me. But I mean, for one example, Christophe had a piece called Hit Parade where he would get as many people as he could. I think he needs at least, I've seen smaller amounts. Anyway, the performance I did had probably about 25 people on it. You lie on a ground, and then based on loose.
Sorry, these are audience members?
These are the performers.
Okay.
But yeah, and the audience is just around you, but you take a microphone and you slam, that's amplified, it's coming through an amp, and you slam it against the ground for an hour based on different parameters around how vigorously or how often you do it and things like that. But so you basically have this sound of mics being slammed, coming through amps for an hour, like as a mass counterpoint. Working with Marla, they now have a whole bunch of. They're too intricate to explain, but she's basically come up with, mechanized mic stands, I guess, in the broadest sense, of different kinds, that does the slamming instead of a person, but it is able to do it in ways, in kind of physical patterns that a human body would have trouble doing. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are other things with mics around, rotating mics and the sounds that come from that. But it's a really interesting collaboration that they've started between these machines, I guess in a sense Marla's machines and Christoph's sense of somatic sound events. And I mean the exciting thing is that though I'm finding more and more it's hard to tell who chose to do what in the pieces they do. So this performance in February is exciting to me because I mean it's a collaboration that's becoming more and more something hybrid between their practices than just drawing on their previous activities.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I should mention again, 4 new works on January 26th. Typically, I think, there's a pre-concert talk at 7. The concert's at 8. Again, there's it's $20, but it's pay what you can as well.
Yeah. And all the composers will be there. So
all the composers will be there.
I'll be talking to
them.
be the 5 of us.
Rat Drifting 3, January 27th, 8 p.m. Again, $15, but also pay what you can. And then number 4, Rat Drifting, February 17th, 8 p.m., $15, also pay what you can.
Absolutely.
And for those who are watching, I guess, on YouTube, you can visit arraymusic.ca, and there's more information there as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm as sure as I can be that all of these concerts are going to be live streamed as well.